Welcome back. We have been discussing presidents and black people, presidents of the United States and black people, and, well, other people of color. Eventually, we're going to talk about Andrew Johnson and indigenous people because I've got a bone to pick with him. Yeah, Trail of Tears, anybody? Serious bone to pick. But until then, Lyndon B Johnson. This is part 2. Yesterday, we briefly discussed his upbringing. He was born and raised in poverty in Texas, just as the state was rewriting its state constitution to disenfranchise black people. We discussed his time in Congress. The first 20 years he was serving, he vetoed every civil rights bill that came his way. Now, let's talk about his presidency, because at the tail end of him serving in Senate, he said, "Oh, let's pass a Civil Rights Act, shall we?" Lyndon B Johnson would become president. He'd become the 36th president upon the assassination of John F. Kennedy. 3 days after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. suggested to the new president that one of the great tributes that we can pay in memory of President Kennedy is to try to enact some of the great progressive policies that he sought to initiate. And President Johnson promised that he would not give up an inch and that King could count on his commitment. As president, he would carry on the work of John F. Kennedy, and I think the work he always wanted to do now that he wasn't dependent solely on white Southerners to get reelected. 7.5 months later, on, the 2nd of July, 1964, Johnson sat at a table in the East Room of the White House and signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The act, considered the most important piece of civil rights legislation since Reconstruction, would prohibit discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. It also forbid discrimination in voting, public accommodations, public facilities, public education, and federally financed programs. Johnson called the act a proud triumph in a long struggle for freedom and quest for equal rights for black people in America. He says, "We believe that all men are created equal, yet many are denied equal treatment. We believe that all men have certain unalienable rights, yet many Americans do not enjoy those rights. We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin." We know that Johnson also signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibits racial discrimination in voting, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, and sex. In 1967, Johnson nominated civil rights attorney Thurgood Marshall to be the first black justice of the Supreme Court. And here's where his racism is showing. When he nominated Marshall, Johnson remarked, "When I appoint an N-word to the bench, I want everybody to know that he's an N-word." And this is the same man who got the Civil Rights Act of 1964 pushed through. He loved the use of the N-word. Yeah. To head the new Department of Housing and Urban Development, Johnson appointed Robert C. Weaver, the first black federal cabinet secretary. In 1968, Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which provided for equal housing opportunities regardless of race, creed, or national origin. But ultimately, He was still a white man with little to no understanding of what it meant to be colored in America. After 150 riots rocked the nation in the 1960s, I believe it was 1964, he ordered the Kerner report. And the Kerner Commission was like, the reason for the riots was white people, discrimination, white people, and cops. Not necessarily in that order, but you get the gist. And Lyndon B Johnson was like, huh? But I passed all these lovely acts. Why are the blacks still mad? And the Kerner Commission was like, I repeat, the reason for the riots is white people, discrimination, white people, and cops. Ooh, and let's throw in lack of jobs. Okay, y'all keep playing. You will end up with a country that has two societies, one black and one white. And what do we have today, y'all? Two societies. There's actually more. But you get my point. Despite the findings of the Kerner report, during the riots following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Washington, D.C., Johnson's solution was to issue an executive order mobilizing combat-equipped troops. The New York Times reported that 4,000 regular U.S. Army and National Guard troops entered the Capitol to try to end riotous looting, burglarizing, and burning by roving bands of Negro youths. Meanwhile, Robert F. Kennedy was like, I know y'all just lost your leader, and I am a white man. I understand. But can I just say this? And he calmed an angry crowd that had a lot of black people with just his words. He just talked to people. Look at that. Lyndon B Johnson is a study in, I don't know what. He started his career opposing every civil rights bill that hit the Senate floor. 1957 rolls around and he does an about-face and starts voting yes, but refers to them as inward bills. And he's still referring to black people as the N-word and gets mad when they want to be called by their actual names. And even after passing life-changing bills like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, he's still low-key a segregationist and clueless on race relations. Ultimately, he was not progressive because he would go on to woo moderate conservatives for his bid to remain in office for a second term, forgoing the bold steps it would take to lead a young nation into a new post-racial society. He was still too old school to lead into a new progressive post-racial society.